Recording. Good. Welcome, gentlemen. I think one of these days it'll be great to see Christina show up. I get emails once in a while from her saying she really wants to come, but she's got lots of little things going on. But welcome again to a number of the ACW Railroad Zoom meets. And Bernie is up on his layout update on the Aquia line, which we're looking forward to. So Bernie, I would like to hand it over to you.
Okie dokie, we'll share the screen. There we go.
Beautiful.
All right, so let's get started. It's been a while since I talked to you guys, and so I'll start off with my little video. Notice the little flags flying in the breeze there. One of these days, I've got to animate that guy with the wood load in there. Oh, that's a little video snip of what's going to talk about. Most of you guys have seen my layout. How many in this group have not been here? I guess, let's see, I could see at least 2 or 3. So I'll quickly go through the background and what I'm doing and then talk about sort of the update with the new stuff that's going on.
Perfect.
So there's a picture of Stoneman Station, or correction, Potomac Creek. And to remind everyone, the area that I'm modeling is the United States Military Railroad, little 13-mile segment from Falmouth down toward Fredericksburg, or correction, from Aquia Landing down to Falmouth, which is across the river from Fredericksburg. And here's a close-up of the 13 miles. So the Aquia Landing is up here. There's Burnside Wharf, which is about a mile down from Aquia Landing. And then the line curves up this creek, a swampy area, cuts across the ridge, cuts across another ridge, and ends up across from Falmouth. So the Union Army is camped out here. They were there almost 6 months. And the rebels are down here. They're really spread out because the RF&P is having trouble providing them with supplies. So these guys are doing a lot of foraging. And just some prototype pictures to give you a flavor for what I'm doing. This is the main wharf at Aquia Landing. So here we're looking toward the shore. This is actually when they're evacuating. So they're pulling everything out. That's one of the 3 float car ferries that they had. And when you look down here, you look down the wharf out to the river, and you can see a boxcar sitting right in the middle. And these things here, I don't know what they are, but I think they're camp stoves. So I'm gonna have to get a 3D print of those made at some point. Notice there you can't see what the little transfer bridge looks like in any of these pictures, so I had to assume what that looked like. Here's some other pictures of Aquia Landing, and you see a lot of people standing around. Got to remember that in the Civil War, once you get off the ships or trains, it's all muscle power. This is the really only photos of Stoneman Station that I know that exist. One's a drawing, but it was enough to build a pretty decent model of the area. Then we reached Potomac Creek. There were 4 bridges built by the Union there during the war. Nobody knows what the original bridge that the RF&P built looked like. We have the famous beanpole and cornstalk trestle here. And then this is the one I modeled down here. And there's a picture of it. Pretty cool looking bridge. It looks like a canyon, but it's really more of a ridge that a creek cuts through. As many of you know, I selected O scale. I tried and it didn't work out too well. I also thought about doing it in 1/32 scale. And this model down here is in 1/32 scale. But when SMR came out with his O scale engines, that convinced me to go to O scale. One of the problems with O scale is it's very big. Here you see Alicia holding the hull to the paddle wheel steamer that I still have not finished 8 years later. But I realized I'm going to need a bigger layout, and I did do some of that. We had some guys work down here a couple of years ago and expanded my layout. And that's what I ended up with after a series of gradual expansions. So Aquia Landing and Burnside's Wharf are down here. You go through Close 8 Tunnel, pop out in Brook, and you end up in Falmouth. Notice it's very tight right in here. When we had the op session with our 3-man crews, we had 6, 7, 8 people in there. That was too much. So that was one of the incentives for what you'll see happens later.
Can I ask a quick question, Bernie?
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
That one?
Hey, I'm looking at the boat there, the paddle wheel schooner. Can you
Paddle
go
wheel
back
schooner.
one? Okay, and that's the boat that your wife's holding, right?
Yeah, it's a Dumas model. And I've built a couple of those Dumas models, and both times I built one for a museum, I'm building one for myself. Both times, in this case, I'm keeping the hull, but I throw everything else away. The kits are maddening, and I hated his instructions. He says stuff like, "Oh, do this, that, and the other thing, and if it doesn't work, don't worry about it. It's just a toy." I said, like, that's not the attitude. So I would have had this boat finished if I just started from scratch, trying to convert his kit. Every time I work on it for a couple of days, I just get so frustrated. I put it away for two years.
You
Anyway.
you have to appreciate the scale of your wife holding that.
Yeah, I thought that my Alicia is not short. She's 5'8", so that's a big boat.
And then you look at the next slide where the boat is going to be. So people begin to get a sense of the scale of
Actually,
what they're
if you
looking
looked,
at.
if the light was on in the other room, you could see the boats just outside the door here. All right, so there's the layout. Some of you have been here, so you know what's going on. One of the problems with O-scale is we really don't have that much, other than the beautiful locomotives that SMR made. Everything else has to be pretty much scratch built. He made some freight cars, but I ended up scratch building my own. So this is the area that's finished on the railroad, 99% finished. There's a few little things I need to do. This is how I got there. I'm using battery power. I did laser cuttings, 3D printing, spin casting, some photo etching, and now we're using microprocessors. And I'll talk about these briefly. So as I mentioned, SMR made these beautiful O-scale engines. I had 6, then I went to 5. Now I'm back to 6. And this is sort of the lineup of all the engines. They really are gorgeous models. And what I've done is I can do a little conversion on them to make them run a little better. I add batteries to 2 of them, and they really are the workhorses on the railroad. And then the others have DCC with current keepers, and those work pretty well too. There's pluses and minuses to both systems. And I'll talk a little bit about that here. One of the problems with the batteries is you don't need track to run. So if you go off, the trains are going to keep going. That hasn't been an issue yet, but it could be. And because I have DCC on my railroad, I use the rails to charge the batteries. So I don't have to take the batteries out or do anything like that. I just trickle charge them. So basically these batteries are like big keep alives. They'll run for an hour or 2. One of the drawbacks is they take up a lot of room. And even though these engines are O-scale, there's not a lot of room for stuff, especially the ones, 5 out of my 6 locomotives have tender drive. And that means the tender is full of motors and gears, and there's no place really for electronics. Now, DCC decoders take up less room. You can see a little sugar cube speaker in my little tiny Osceola. But they do have the drawback that if there's a short, they will stop. Whereas the battery power locos pop through. And because I have some tight radii on my layout and the frames are metal, I occasionally do get a short. Although lately that has not been a problem. And by lately, I mean the last 4 or 5 years, I've kind of sorted that out. So that's working pretty good. I have been using an Epilogue Mini laser cutter, and now I have this Zing laser cutter. And if anybody's interested in buying it, I'm getting a new laser in a couple weeks. And if you're in this area and want to pick this up, I'm asking $5,000 for it. It still runs good. I'm getting a new one with the new software that'll allow me to use Illustrator. This one requires CorelDRAW, and it has some other features, plus it has more power. So anybody's interested, let me know. And with a laser, you know, you can do a lot of things. I've built a lot of stuff with my laser. Those are the interiors for my passenger car down there. You can cut wood, acrylic, styrene a little bit. It tends to melt. So anything that's really narrow or sharp will kind of disappear. You can't cut vinyl, which is a bummer because they can cut masks and things with vinyl, would be really nice. And I don't have enough power in my laser to cut metal. You need at least 100 watts and a gas system. So one of the things I made was the big bridge at Potomac Creek. All the parts were laser cut. There were 3,000 parts in that bridge. And so fortunately, the laser was able to simplify a lot of that. And it was kind of like how the bridge was actually built. All the parts were prefabbed and then assembled on this little jig, which is actually just the frame of the bridge itself. And because everything was cut so precisely, the parts just jigged themselves. So it was really cool. I've also used a laser to make these detail parts. I sell those O-scale detail parts for people that want to detail their O-scale layouts. I've used a laser to scratch build a lot of the rolling stock, including the trucks, although some of the trucks are cast metal, and I'm transitioning to 3D printed on my trucks. I did an Adams Express company because I found that the Adams Express was existed at the Aquia line. And this is one of the examples of a scratch built rolling stock. I actually used this car to get the certificate and the NMRA for the freight cars. So I detailed the interior of it, you know, to get the full points and all that. And so I did, by using most of the things on my Aquia line, I was able to get the Master Model Railroader certification. So that was pretty cool. I'm using laser cut links and magnetic track nails for my pins. So I actually use link and pin couplers, except on the fronts of the engines, you have to use the extended link here, which are a little trickier because they're not as forgiving as the big links that I'm using. And here you see an example of one of my operators pulling the pin, and it's very easy to pull the pin. So he's using a little magnetic wand to pull the car, and then he tells his engineer to pull forward. And there you go, that's all it takes. Coupling up's a little trickier. I've gotten pretty good at it. I've had some operators who are older who have shaky hands and things and they can't do it. So if we get a guy like that, what we do is we try to put him as the engineer, and we get somebody who has steadier vision and hands to do the conductor job. Oops. I have been using my spin caster, but again, I'm getting rid of this. And actually, I'm giving this away. So whoever will be willing to come to my house and pick it up can have it. It all still works fine. It's just that I found I didn't really use it that much, and I really need to clear that space out of my garage. So if anybody needs a spin caster, there it is. This is the spin caster back here. This is the vulcanizing setup, and that's the metal, the pot to melt the metal. But I did use that to make some cannons, basically with cast wheels and cast cannon barrels, and then laser cut and photo etch detail parts. These are being replaced by 3D printed ones, which I'll show you in a little bit. If you don't know about photo etching, it's a process where you do artwork, and then I don't do the etching myself. I send it out to a place in Massachusetts. They do the etching, send me the parts back, and you can get really good detail. So down here, you see an example of one of the switch stands that's made with photo etched stainless steel. That is the scale size that the switch stand would have been back then. So this is, I think, one of the few railroads that I know of that uses scale size switch stands to actually switch their track. So that's pretty cool. How do we get out of this? There we go. It's stronger than wood. The parts can be very precise. The problem is it's pretty expensive to do. And when it comes to the Civil War, we don't have a lot of metal that we need to etch. So it's not that useful for a Civil War railroad. But I've done a few things with it, like the brake parts and the switch stands. And here's an example of the working brakes on my railroad. Not all the cars have working brakes, just the ones that I send to Potomac Creek, because Potomac Creek is on a slope. And so you set the brakes when you get there. Otherwise, you don't really have to mess with the working brakes.
Progress.
So there you go. So again, I don't know too many railroads that have working brakes, but now I have been getting into 3D printing. I wish I had started this a long time ago. I'm learning the software, and I've got a Formlabs printer, and I've printed some things. And here's an example. So this is a 3D printed limber that I drew up. And Jerry Dykstra sent me the drawings. Well, he didn't send me the drawings. He sent me a file where I could print the battery wagon, but I could not modify that file. So I ended up drawing my own wheels. And this is my latest thing. I worked on this last week. This is a 3D printed cannon. And all of the detail stuff is now printed on. So you don't have to use the photo etch details if you don't want to. So it saves time because all I have to do is attach the wheels and the cannon's ready to be painted. And the Aquia line is now going to be very well protected by artillery in case everybody decides to come take it. I've also been playing with 3D printing. Now, I worked on this a year ago to 3D print the engine, and I stopped working on it and decided I really needed to learn the software better because I was drawing it and not laying it out so that changes could be made easily, and a lot of changes are needed on this project. So that's as far as I got, and I shelved that project, and I'll come back to it when the expansion is done. But it has promise. And by the way, this gold paint or brass paint here is a new paint that I got from AK Interactive. And by golly, it really looks like brass. I compare it to some of my cast brass pieces, and it's almost indistinguishable. So it's a good paint to try. Not the buffable one that comes in a tube. This is just one that you airbrush. And I think you have to use their thinner or acetone or lacquer thinner to thin it. Now, this is really big news. We've got the telegraph system is actually being finished. And I have the benefit of an electrical engineer from New England, and not Mike. This is a new guy in my area called Ambrose Nangeroni. He's an electrical engineer from Northeastern, and he has volunteered to finish building all the stations. So I built the first one to test it. There were some glitches in the software, so I sent it back to Seth and Steve in California. They're the guys who wrote the code and designed the hardware based on my spec. And they changed the software and sent it back to me, and then I put it away and didn't really touch it. And Ambrose came by a couple of weeks ago, and we got this one out, got it started, and he has since built all 5 of the stations. So here's how it works. So when you're an operator, you'll know your train number. When you get to the station, you'll rotate that knob to your station and then push either regular or extra. And then that will generate the Morse code that'll be received at the dispatcher's office right behind me. And the dispatcher will listen to the dots, count the dots, and then translate the message. If you're desperate, there's going to be a little door on the dispatch panel that you flip down, and there will actually be a light lighting up that shows you which station is sending the message. So if you get confused, you'll at least know which station it was.
Damn.
So it does repeat, and Ambrose has tested it all, and it's working really well. In fact, I think the next slide, here's all the stations at Ambrose's house. So you can see all 5 of them are built, and then all this junk sits in the dispatcher's panel. He sent me a picture today of mounting it like on a little wood chassis that'll fit in the thing behind me. And so hopefully by next week, we will be laying the cables for the telegraph system, and the telegraph system will soon be operational, which is a major milestone for us because I'm a mechanical engineer. I don't really like doing this kind of electronics work. Plus, Amby being a electrical engineer, he actually saw some ways to improve the circuitry and so on. And we reduced the cabling need from a 6 cable to a 5 cable. So it's really good to have an electrical engineer do the work, especially when I hate to do wiring. And that's where the system will go. The little display panel is going to sit right there. That clock goes in there. Unfortunately, that clock is a quartz battery power clock, but it never worked right. So I don't know if it needs a new battery or what. So that'll be my dispatcher station with the important cookie jar for the operators to have their snacks. All right, so another thing is we use the internet, and you guys know all about this, so I won't talk about too much, except I do recommend if you're curious about what's going on over here, you can check my blog. And now here's some pictures of the finished railroad. So this is Claiborne Creek, which is one of Hop's W trestles. He came up with this design because he thought it used less wood. The stone abutments were built by the RF&P, and the Union just laid their new bridges and rails on top of them. And here we see the Osceola, which if it could pull more cars would be my favorite engine. It's basically SMR's Yona, but I had them custom letter it for me for the Osceola. And it runs great, it sounds great, but it can only pull 4 cars. And that's a shame because it's so cool. So we use it for the General Special. And I think we ran the General Special the last time the Civil War guys were here. And that's basically wherever the General goes. In this case, it's Hooker, although it started with Burnside. There has to be an engine kept in steam in case he decides he wants to go somewhere. And so the Osceola is the engine that's kept in reserve for the general, the commanding general.
Hmm.
And here you come around Stoneman Station. There's one of the scale switch stands that I talked about. And you've got my wire trees in the foreground, this big one here. This is made out of wire. And I did that for two reasons. One, operators, if you hit a natural material, the tree can break. And so if an operator hits this tree, the operator is going to lose. And he'll remember not to touch that tree again. Now,
Yep.
a couple months ago, I came down to the basement and one of the fluorescent lights over Aquia Creek fell off the ceiling, went through the egg crate diffuser and landed on the railroad. And one end hit a locomotive, knocked it off the track, but didn't hurt it. The other end landed on the tree. There were 3 trees over there. And the tree said, "Oh, fine, we'll hold it up for you." So they really are useful for foreground scenery. Here's a new picture of Stoneman Station. I took last month, I went around, or this month, I've been taking some new shots of the railroad for an article that's going to be in O-Scale magazine. And I realized I never took a shot of this area like this. So I thought this was kind of neat because we frequently do have meets and things going on at Stoneman Station.
Bernie, quick question.
Yeah.
Is that a wire tree in the back?
No, that tree is an interesting one. That was a dead bonsai tree that my brother had. And one day he was up here and I gave him super tree sprigs. And he said, "This looks kind of like a live oak," or I think he said sassafras. I don't know. I forget what he said. Sycamore. So anyway, he put super tree sprigs on a dead bonsai azalea, I think it was. And
Nice.
so that tree is extremely delicate. So it's in the background where people can't touch it.
Right.
Plus, if you look at prototype pictures, there was one tree standing by that tented structure. So it kind of matches the prototype. And there's Potomac Creek, which is the bridge I opted to model. And this is right before I poured the water. This is an older picture. But you can see the footbridge in the background. This is all based on prototype photos. The one thing about this bridge is it's about 50% of its actual size. And Charlie has really big bridges, and I have bridge envy. So I think I might have to build this bigger someday. It's bad. Having bridge envy is very, very bad. And at Potomac Creek, I don't have room for the full siding. I just have a little stub. But this is the siding that's on a grade. Why? Because I'm a Polish engineer and I forgot about it. And so therefore, the cars have a tendency to roll down. And that's why I had to put working brakes on some of them. But that's the way I control that is I have the waybill cards list working brakes on the cars. And when I set up the waybills, I make sure they go to Potomac Creek. And this is probably, well, it was my favorite scene on the railroad. Maybe some new scenes have supplanted it, but I always liked this scene. It's just so simple. It's just a train going through the countryside with a snake rail fence in the background. And you can't really see it too well because of the smoke, but the backdrop here really integrated well with the foreground. And so this became my favorite scene. There's another view of it. You can see how the backdrop kind of blends in better with the background. And then at Aquia Creek, I have the mill. There was a little discussion on my blog recently about this mill because for this next picture here, we have Nettie and her pig now at the mill. And the mill does not belong on the Aquia line. The mill is located in Fairfax County. But I needed a water mill or some feature, some way of hiding the missing skyboard here. The skyboard ended right there. And I didn't want to go in and try to spackle and putty something. So I thought, well, we'll just put a water mill. And I picked the one from Fairfax County because it was there during the Civil War. There's Civil War graffiti at this mill. The plans were available at the Library of Congress. And it had this interesting story about Nettie and her pig. And basically, in 1862, when the Union occupied the area, some of the soldiers foraged and grabbed her pet pig. And so she carried on so much that her mother said to one of the servants, take her down to the military base and see, or the military camp, and see if you can get the pig back. So they were met by sentries. She went in there and she told the commanding officer, crying, they stole my pig. So he said, can you identify who took it? She said, yes. So he lined up all his men And she said that was the man. And the captain or colonel said, do you have the pig? He said, yes, sir. He says, we'll give it back to her. And so Nettie got her a pig, and the soldier actually carried it back to they lived by this water mill. So that's the story of Nettie and a pig, and she's now on the railroad. For 10 years or so, she wasn't there. She finally got her pig.
Hey, Bernie, you painted your own backdrops, did you?
Yeah.
Is that corn in front of the mill? Is that painted or is that part of a real?
Which thing in front of the mill?
That corn. I mean, way back it looks painted, but right in front of the mill, that corn looks like it's like really there. Yeah, that corn.
Well, that's not really corn. That's just a dead tree that's painted on the backdrop. The backdrop, this stone wall is right against the backdrop.
Oh.
So that's the backdrop right there. I'll go back a picture. Yeah, you can see the backdrop right there. How I love doing this. See how the road goes right onto the backdrop?
Brilliant.
That's one of my favorite things in this hobby is doing that.
Mhm.
Sorry.
That's
Oh,
a
that's good.
really good join.
Yeah. Right now, when my layout flooded, I had to jack up the railroad, and now have a crack right there. So it's on my do list. I've been going back and fixing those one by one, but it's just so much easier to Photoshop the crack out. Yeah, I have a few places where there was cracks in the railroad, particularly 2 places on my fascia that I've got to redo. But the paint I use for my fascia is no longer available, and the new paint doesn't quite match. So it's one of these things where the slightest little impediment prevents you from moving forward, you know? Okay, so here's Brook. This is the next town. I don't have any prototype pictures of Brook. Nothing. There's a few little buildings there now, but it's much different than what it was. So I freelanced this whole area with buildings from all over. So this mill here, a warehouse really, is from Gordon, who actually had a warehouse in Falmouth. And he was the first he was the first millionaire in the United States who made his money on commercial enterprise, not on real estate. So guys like Washington and Jefferson and Mason, they were all millionaires, but they got their money from land. This guy made it from trading tobacco and con. And I knew that they had a sawmill somewhere on the Aquia line because they talk about it, but they never noted where it was. And so I had a flat spot on the railroad. So that's where I put the sawmill. And this is all scratch built based on photos of what early mid-19th century or sawmills look like.
Question.
Yeah.
The cart over to the left, lower left, looks
Yes.
like that's for sawdust. Was that a scratch built one?
No, that little thing there is from Train Troll, the guy up in Massachusetts. He has a few little things, and I bought that just to see what it was all about. And I decided to put it there. I think it was originally used for coal.
Got it.
I might have to get another one because I do have a coal pile at Aquia, and that would be handy at Aquia.
Rhode Island.
So let's see, where were we? Oh yeah, we watch a train come in the brook here. This is McCallum. And I just, this railroad is what, 10, 13 years old? I had to fix that turnout again. Humidity really wreaks havoc on the railroad.
Yep.
And I had to file down one of the
Rails.
the stock rails, because all my wheel sets, except the ones I got from SMR trains, fit through there fine. But the SMR train ones, I think the wheels are just a little bit too fat and they were catching. Anyway, so I fixed that. It's funny how your railroad needs maintenance. No matter, you just let it sit, it still needs maintenance. This is a new picture of Brook. This is a difficult picture to take if you're just standing in my railroad, because right where the flag is, like 2 inches above that flag, is the wall, and then that low ceiling that I've talked about, the head knocker. And so to make this picture look pretty, you have to take the sky out and put in a fake sky, or a real sky, I should say. But this picture was, once I did it, I was like, wow, I think this is my favorite picture on the railroad now. It does convey that little feeling of a little town, the way all the buildings and the street and all that. And if you go back, I am thinking about putting this is thanks to you, Tom. I want to put a foundry right here, chopped in half, so you can see all the stuff on the inside.
Right.
So at some point, I'm going to ping you for info on foundries.
Love to. You don't have to pay me. Well, I'll figure something out.
But that's not for a while.
Right.
So anyway, so there's a picture of Brooke. I have my little cartoon here of the lady who's stayed in the little inn or the tavern, and she's got caught the doctor trying to sneak out. And then we have Crozet Tunnel, or Closet Tunnel, I'm sorry. This was based after Crozet Tunnel, but since my tunnel goes through a closet, I call it Closet Tunnel. And this is a train heading toward Aquia Landing.
So you're saying Crozet Tunnel was actually on the Aquia line?
No,
Oh,
Crozet Tunnel is on the Virginia Central, but there are no tunnels on the Aquia line.
got it.
But I need tunnels because I have to go through walls.
Right.
So instead of making my Crozet Tunnel, I have Closet Tunnel with an L
Very good.
for closet. And you'll see there's another one too. Sorry, can't resist the puns.
I love it.
So Aquia
Love that.
Landing is a work in progress. It's been a work in progress for 13 years. But recently I was looking at some of my prototype pictures and I finally found evidence of the flagpole that they put up. I have a letter that talks about this flagpole, but I never saw it in a picture. Finally, remember that picture I showed you of the evacuation? If you look closely in the background, you will see the big flagpole.
Ah,
And the flag was 40, what did they say, 40 feet? I don't know, it's huge. That's the actual size of the flag. And by the way, a little tip, if war gamers can use this too. If you want to make a flag for a model, and you can make it out of paper like I do, don't make it rectangular. Make it a trapezoid like this. Because when you hang a flag, the cloth has no shear strength. And so the cloth will drape and naturally form a trapezoid. And that makes the flag much easier to shape into a natural shape. Unless you have a hurricane and the flag is standing straight out,
right.
a trapezoid looks much more realistic.
Good tip.
So this is still work in progress. I really do need to finish these ships. This is a recent picture of the Provost Marshal Station. This area is getting close to being done. It needs a few more figures, but I moved the family of slaves that were trying to escape from the Falmouth area. They're now down at Aquia Landing, and they're arranging for their transportation back to up to Washington and Freedom.
What are the notices on the marshal's office?
Those are reproductions of what was actually there. So one of them is the train schedule, and the other one says there will be no boat to Washington today, something like that. I can't remember exactly what it says. Can we zoom? I don't think we can zoom in this program. But
If you right click it, click it, maybe.
No,
No? Okay.
zoom in. Wait a minute,
There
Tom,
you
you
go.
are a genius.
There you go.
So it says, it's an exact copy of whatever was there, because I do have a picture of this. And it's something about the boat to Washington, but I don't remember. Only one boat or something like that. So it was just a notice. Now, the Provost Marshal controlled access to the trains and the ships. Civilians technically weren't allowed to do it, but if they got a pass from the Provost Marshal, civilians could ride. And military men had to have a pass. And the cargo obviously didn't need a pass. I was reading a little while ago a story about a soldier who was stationed at Aquia Landing, and it was cold. It was a very cold winter that year. And he got a pass, so he took the train down to Aquia Landing. But then he couldn't take the train back. He had to walk 8 miles back to his camp. He almost froze to death. He had to stop at another unit's camp and get warmed up before he could make it. So things were a lot different than they are now. Anyway, so that's Aquia Landing. And eventually this roof comes off and this upper floor will be detailed, because I got a picture of the officers' quarters at Fort Ward that have basically been a copy for this room. So that'll be kind of cool. My philosophy is buildings in the foreground get full detail treatment and the ones in the background don't. So here's Burnside's Wharf, and this is the only ship model that I have completed on the railroad. Why? Because all I did was paint it on the backdrop. It's a lot easier. It took one night to paint that on the backdrop, whereas it's taken me 10 years to build some of these boat models. I actually have two on the backdrop. There's another one. I just copied this out of a book, basically. It's one of the paddle wheel steamers. And I do like the figure aspect of it. It's one of the reasons I like O scales. The figures are big enough that you can paint them and they have a little personality to them. And this railroad does operate. I've had 22 sessions. This is a replica of the timetable. I have the timetable from 1864. I don't have it from 63. So I made a timetable, and the only thing I did a little different was I added a few more, a little more frequency of trains. They did not have trains scheduled. They did not have scheduled meets on the railroad. They sent trains out and they came back. They would meet extras, but there were no scheduled meets. So I do have scheduled meets. So wherever you see a bold number, that means that 2 trains are scheduled to meet at that location. And if you've operated my railroad, you know about the clipboard. There's your track link and pin knob. You got extra links, extra couplers, and you get flags, white and red flags, depending on what train you're running. And you get train orders and got to do a conductor's report. I've had 22 sessions so far, official. Then COVID hit, so I haven't operated since COVID. I've also had a lot of things like kids coming over. This was a kid weekend and we had little girls running trains and the kids did great. One time I had some kids here, they ran 3 trains at one time without any trouble.
Wow.
So that was fun. This is Bill Darby. Everyone's heard about him. He's a real excitable fellow. You can see how excited he's getting here backing a train into Aquia Landing. He's very, very quiet. So here's my future plans. I do need to finish Aquia Landing. There's a lot of boats. I actually subcontracted out one of my boat models to a guy who's a very good modeler. He's an ex-Navy guy, but I haven't heard from him in about 6 months. He's got my deposit, so I hope he's working on the boat. He lives locally, so he's not going to run away. I need about 10 more freight cars. Why? Because I'm expanding the railroad and I need longer trains. The telegraph is coming, maybe period costume, I don't know. Lots of details to add. I want to start learning how to sculpt figures on the computer. That's one of my retirement objectives. I got to finish scratch fin the locomotive, and we've got to finish the expansion, which I have started. I threw this little picture and have recently finished this for the Alexandria Freedom Museum, Freedom House they call it. This is a model of the slave jail as it existed before the Civil War. That was a little distraction that took a couple of months to build. And I do have plans to expand the railroad. This is air power. Now, the story behind this picture is that George Wallace, who is one of the O-scale kings, he's an O-scale modeler. He visited my railroad a couple times, actually. He lives in Oklahoma. And he was telling me that he was an F-105 pilot in Vietnam. And I said, oh, that was one of my favorite airplanes when I was a kid. So I love that Coke bottle fuselage. And so after he left, I ginned this picture up in Photoshop and I sent it to him. And he goes, wow, how did you know what squadron I was in? And I said, what do you mean? And he goes, that yellow nose cone was my squadron. I said, that was pure luck. I didn't know that.
How about that?
Anyway, so that's why we have F-105s over the Aquia line. Now in 2019, we had the Great Flood. And this is actually a picture of the Johnstown flood. And you can see that was pretty devastating. But my flood was almost as bad, at least for me, emotionally. I had to get rid of my HO layout, which was here.
Right.
And I never really planned on keeping that railroad forever, but everyone loved it. So it was hard to get rid of. However, it did survive. It went to Texas. Well, I sold it to a friend who then moved to Texas, but he's coming back to Virginia now and he'll be living in Charlottesville. And he just texted me a couple of days ago, he's working on it. And you see what we did was we had to jack up the railroad so we could replace the floor. And this area got jacked up. I didn't cover up that much. It was easy to clean that up because that's really not super detailed in there. You can see the workers here. They're putting up shims so they can jack the railroad up and put the tile under the railroad. And that's what it looked like it was finished. But nature abhors a space. And we got to put model railroad in there somehow. My wife really liked it like this, but it can't stay like that. And so we're talked about expansion. And so this was one idea considered, running the railroad to Fredericksburg, because I thought having the town of Fredericksburg would be kind of cool. but that would not be my time period. That would move forward into 1862, or I guess back into 1862. And I'm modeling January of, or March of 63. So I would have to get rid of the truss and put the beanpole trestle up, and then I could go with Fredericksburg. So I decided not to do that. And as you remember, the area up here where Falmouth was the problem. And so I looked at a lot of plans that move Falmouth into this part of the house where the crew lounge is. So this was one idea that I looked at. And I would simplify Aquia Landing and have a longer run. Well, that was one concept. And this is another concept where I would extend Aquia Landing and put Falmouth back there and still have the longer run and go through this closet. But this is what I ended up with. So I left Aquia Landing as it was because I like having Burnside Wharf separate from the landing. And this gives a lot of room here for the operators at Falmouth. So if 2 trains are at Falmouth, there's plenty of room for the people. And you'll go across the trestle here. I'm calling this Mueller's Run in honor of Al. And this little hill over here is going to be called Ball's Bluff for Don Ball, who just also passed away. And so that's what my new expansion looks like, track plan wise. I did some of this, and this is, by the way, in the article of Mono Railroad Planning this year. So if you get the article, it's actually the lead article. They did a really nice job of presenting the article this time. And this was how I helped verify in my own mind that Plan A was the best plan. And one of the challenges is going through this stairs here. There is no vertical clearance right there. The smokestacks of the engines are like a 1/4 inch from this landing. And so there's no place to build it. So this chunk and this chunk, well, this chunk was built in the garage and then dropped in as one piece. So I got all the track laid on there, run nice and smooth, tested. Then I connected it just with this straight section that went through here. And I do have a kink right there. Flex, low scale flex track does not like 30-degree radii. And so I do have a little problem here that took a lot of fiddling to get that to work. But now everything runs through here nice and smooth. And so here's a picture of how I did that. I cut these sections on my chop saw, so they're all very precise. And then they have 2 dominoes and pocket screws that hold them together. So they're very strong. And that way I only needed 1 piece of plywood to make all these curves. And I used a nice quality plywood for that. And you can see here's how I prefab that section that goes under the stairs in the garage. So that was built super solid, super strong. And then here's right here is where the old section and the new section join. So hopefully you can't tell.
Yeah.
I did reinstall battery shaper back there. That's also named after a friend who passed away. That, by the way, you guys probably know this, but in the Civil War, they had a habit of naming military facilities after deceased officers or heroes.
Right.
Now, this is interesting. I did not know about this place until I started building the expansion. And I was going to put the Worthington farm here from the Battle of Monocacy because my wife is related to those Worthingtons. But then I found out that the Primer farm was here. This guy was a pro-union person living in Virginia. He was originally from the North. He moved down to Stafford County and had a 400-acre farm. His son enlisted in the Union Army. So when the Union occupied this area, they used his house as a headquarters, and they did chop down most of his trees and took most of his pigs and cows and took all, a lot of stuff, but he was pro-union. So after the war, he filed a claim and he was reimbursed for that damage because he was able to prove his loyalty. So there's one picture of this building from this angle. And so from that picture, I was able to scratch build his farm. He's probably like a mile from the tracks, but I don't have a mile. So I put him right on the tracks along with this barn. This barn is a typical Virginia era barn. This was actually copied after the one in Appomattox, except that there should be another wing here if this was to do Appomattox. And the nice thing about these O-scale buildings is, they're this big in reality, and so they act as view blocks. So when there's a train back there, you don't see it because the buildings. So this is that tight curve, and the buildings help screen the fact that the trains are taking the tight curve. So that was, I think, a nice feature, nice way to incorporate the farm into the railroad.
Bernie, if you would go back to the one before that last one. So the trees in the background there, I'm curious as to how you were able to eliminate or prevent shadows from those trees against your backdrop.
Well, these trees are right against the backdrop. I think there's 3 rear ones, and then I painted some on the backdrop to match it. And so the shadows kind of get all blended in there, and it kind of hides them a little bit.
Got it.
But I do have shadows. There's a really bad shadow up here at the top, so I have to clean that up in Photoshop. But because I have such diffuse lighting in my railroad, I don't have strong shadows in most places.
That's great.
And so there's a few shadows here and there, but and I tried to clean them up in Photoshop when I present my pictures. Got to show the layout in a good light, you know.
Yep.
So this one I played with just a fake sky back there just to see what it would look like, and it came out pretty good. That's actually the background of this picture is the Battle of Franklin in Tennessee.
Oh,
I was down there last summer and I got a picture, and it's a nice sort of Civil War era looking picture in the background.
beautiful.
And then here's where this is only like an inch from the backdrop right back here. And so I had to take a lot of care in painting this backdrop. And this is not the best angle to look at it. It looks really good when you look head on. But that really does go into the recedes into the distance. I used Daniel Shard's book, Landscape Illusion, for some of the ideas on how to get the perspective of these fields correct.
Nice.
And one of the things that you learn when you put stuff on the internet was I bought these cows from Woodland Scenics, I believe. And I had this picture on my website, and some guy says, oh, well, your cows should have horns because hornless cattle weren't bred until the 1890s, 1910 or something. So sure enough, I go back and I look at all the pictures of Civil War cows, and they all have horns. So I had to go put horns on all my cows. So now I have horny cows.
That's DC's next project here.
They actually, oh, what's the word? I mean, modern cattle have horns too. They're pulled. They're usually burned off with acid.
They have bred them now so that they don't have horns, I guess, so they don't fight each other. But back then, the other thing about cows back then, if you look at the pictures of the cows back then, is they're pretty scrawny compared to cows now, because the way they got these cows where they need to be was they marched them.
Right.
So they probably were not fat cows.
Right.
Anyway, the things you learn from working on Civil War Railroad. I'm from Brooklyn. I don't know about cows. You know, we know pigeons and rats. That's what we know.
Cockroaches.
Cockroaches. We didn't have cockroaches. We had things called water bugs.
Oh, yeah.
All right. So here's I call this area Dry's Curve because my friend John was looking at it. He's not dead yet, so maybe I should rename it. He did get a pacemaker last week, though, so he's on his way. Oh, sorry, John. We were just talking last night about how we're starting to feel our mortality. But anyway, nice curve, nice S curve. And that's the new length of train that with the new expansion, I'll be running 10 to 12 cars.
Nice.
And the engines can pull them, no problem. I do have another tunnel. Now this one goes under the stairs. So it's called Stairs Tunnel, S-T-A-R-E-S. Sorry. And if you notice back here, there's a guy.
Yep.
All right, what's he doing up there? I was reading the book, The Telegraph or Lincoln in the Telegraph Room, something like that by Homer Bates. You can get it online for free. And he talks about how the operators at Aquia line detected somebody eavesdropping on the line. So apparently he would hook in, and when he hooked in, their tone on the line changed. And so the operators could hear that he was there. So they would send him messages to go away, we know you're there. Now they sent all their messages in code. So unless he could break the code, it wasn't gonna do him any good. But they never found him. However, 1 year, 1 week or whatever, they were searching the line and they found some silk wires laying near one of the poles. So they suspected that was the guy who was eavesdropping.
Interesting.
Now, one of the things, we talk about the North had all these advantages. Another advantage of the North was they had much superior codes. Their codes essentially were unbreakable for the Confederates, and the Yankees could decode the Confederate messages. So, for example, when Grant was taking Vicksburg, they would intercept the Confederate messages. They would retransmit them to Washington. The code breakers would translate them and send them back to Grant in a couple hours. So Grant knew what messages were being sent on the Confederate lines. It's just incredible. Also, during the Overland campaign, the Union telegraph lines got so good, they were running 2 miles an hour. And Grant had telegraph communications with his corps commanders, which is basically was unheard of in combat at that time. Real-time communication with the corps commanders. So just another example of the Union technological superiority helped them win the war. So here's where we are in the expansion. There's Ball's Bluff back there. You can see the fascia comes up a little bit. This is actually a mock-up of the fascia. The fascia is now in. And so the hill will go up like this. And then the balloon will sit right there to try to hide that corner. I did not want to put a cove corner here. I did not want to cover up that window because that window is technically a fire escape. However, you never want to go through that window because as you pop out inside a thorn bush. So it's going to be ugly if you go through that window. So here's the new, and now I have, at this time, I don't have a picture, I don't think, but right now, everything except that turnout and this turnout down here are done. So I'm almost done laying the track up here.
Nice.
So I'm getting there. I have to be ready. I'm supposed to have an op session in June. I think it's June. And here's a earlier view of more or less the overall expansion. And you can see how the balloon, now the balloon was located at Falmouth. So this is not gratuitous. There was a balloon camp down here. And I bought the kit from DC. I promptly ruined that kit because I tried to do things to it that I shouldn't have. I scratched up on my own balloon. And then yesterday, my brother mailed me another one of those kits that he found at a model show. So I have a backup to my backup, which is the one that DC gave me and I have to go in the trash. Oh, well, sorry. This is a mock-up of what the low trestle will look like at Mueller's Creek. And I wanted a low trestle because they're very common in the Civil War. And there was a trestle at Accokeek Creek. So that's kind of what I'm doing here. And this mock-up was useful because it showed me that I needed to make the scene a little deeper because I put my camera down there and, with the mock-up. And so I actually moved the fascia away from the wall a little bit to give a little more room in the foreground so that the pictures and things would look cool and videos of this area. I think this will be a really cool scene though, because this is probably about 8 feet right here. And so we'll have a nice long high hill behind this trestle. I think that's gonna look cool. All right, so thanks to Dave for getting me started on all this. And then those are the fellows that have been helping me. And I really have to lately call out Ambrose because, or Amby as we call him. He's been working on the telegraph and that should be installed soon. And then he says he wants a spike rail too. But he has to be very careful because he has, his wife is susceptible to COVID because of some pre-existing condition. And so he tends to work on his house and just bring this stuff over. But that's okay, I don't mind. There's my blog if you guys don't know about it. Also, Al Kempinski Models, I do have some Civil War stuff on there for O-scalers. Pick up my book if you haven't already. That's still in print. And I have some other books. This one here is out of print. It's interesting. Got an email from a guy this week who's actually 2 times this has happened last month. They're building plans out of this book, which I thought was pretty cool.
Cool.
One's World War I. And then I said I had a secret announcement. So Middle Atlantic Road prototype meet is going to happen, assuming COVID goes away or is manageable. And we were going to have it at the same hotel in September, but the hotel can't do it because of some scheduled maintenance on the air conditioning. So this is not 100% yet, but it's close to 90%. We will be holding it in October, the same weekend as the Great Scale Model Train Show at Timonium. And we will be at the one of the hotels in that area, like two miles away from the fairgrounds. So Saturday morning, if you don't want to do the clinics, you can go over to the scale train show and then come back and attend our clinics. And we will have clinics on Friday all day. We'll actually have more. I think we're gonna have 3 in a row or 3 simultaneously. And we're gonna have some open houses on Thursday. So I think it's gonna be a good show for 2022. I'm the director of it. That's why I threw this in here.
Are you going to be open?
I will be open on Sunday. So, because the reason I can't be open on Thursday is I have to be at the hotel sort of running things and signing
Right.
contracts and writing checks and doing all that nasty stuff.
What's the
So-
date again?
It's going to be the 13th, 14th, 15th of October. I'll send out more messages once the contract's signed. I'm going up there Monday. The reason I couldn't do it last week was I got the phone call from the Scale Model Train Show guys the same night that we did the Zoom for the Civil War guys. So I had to talk to them and we had to iron out some details about how we're going to do this. What happens is because we're doing it in conjunction with the Scale Show, we don't have to have vendors at our meet. And so that frees up space for more clinics. And you get a much bigger train show that you can go to if you want to. You know, as I mentioned earlier, there isn't much at the train show that I need, but other people need things. And so they can go to that and get what they need and then come back to our convention. So we'll have clinics all day Friday. There is no train show on Friday. And then we'll have more clinics on Saturday, but Saturday morning will be kind of a reduced number because most people will be at the train show. There's actually an O-scale show that same weekend up in Strasbourg. And so we expect there'll be a smaller crowd at our meet in the morning, but then in the afternoon and the evening, we go back to a full slate of clinics. You know, and there's some O-scale guys are going to bring one of their O-scale layouts. I'd love to have some Civil War guys show up because I'll do a talk if they need me. But, you know, Tom, I'd love to have you come and talk about your steel mill. Hint, hint. DC, you got to come and talk about your railroad. And any of you guys, you know, Mike up there, everyone would love to see all the electronics you're doing. I promise to let you back to Massachusetts. I won't steal you. I got an engineer now from Massachusetts. I don't need another one. Andy has a great Boston accent, by the way. It's great.
Yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about doing some telegraph stuff too.
Well, if you want to do it this way, the circuitry is just contact Seth and Steve. And they, the way we did it was I wrote the spec, kind of like a defense contractor. I said, this is what I would like it to do, kind of like in a block diagram.
Yep.
And I said, what do you guys have? And they had some circuits that they could use. But here's the amazing thing. Steve custom wrote all the code in the Arduino. So they designed the circuits, had them made in China, populated the circuit cards with the chips, Arduinos and a few other little things, wrote all the code and shipped it to me. Guess how much they charged me?
Well, they did it for fun, right?
No, it wasn't free, but it was practically free.
Really?
$200.
Oh, well, that was free.
Then I built the first one and needed some testing or some changes. I sent it all back to them and they rewrote the code. Now they're saying, hey, if you need any help, let us know, blah, blah, blah. And Amby and John and Seth are now doing EE talk, which is kind of like two Cylons talking to each other.
Yeah.
You know, they made some improvements. So it'll be to the point where if you come to operate the railroad and you want to be the dispatcher, you should be able to do it without having to know anything beforehand.
That's cool.
Because we'll have the dot, you know, chug, 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 chug. That's W. So we'll have that, and that's about the speed it goes. So it goes pretty slow. But if you miss it, you can just look at the light. The light will tell you who's sending the message. And then you could probably figure out what train number it is just from context. Now, there's one cool feature that we built in. This was in my spec. I sent him like 10 messages from the National Archives, actual messages. And the telegraph system will randomly play those, like every now and then. So Amby did not know about this. So he had the thing set up in his house and he's like puttering in the basement. All of a sudden the thing started playing a message. He's like, what's going on? I had to tell him, oh yeah, those are the random messages that are just like what I call audio scenery. just, it'll make it sound like there's a real telegraph there.
That's
Oh,
cool.
Amby had another good idea, because once the message comes into the telegraph system, the telegraph dispatcher will write it down, translate it. Once he's pretty sure that he's got what he needs, he has to hit a button to clear the message, because the message repeats itself until acknowledged. So Amby said, why don't we use the telegraph key as the switch? So as the operator, you grab this, thing, and you just click it once or twice, and that'll stop the message. How cool is that?
Yeah.
So anyway, that's going to be a lot of fun, I hope. You guys know I hate wiring, so I'm so glad Amby showed up. Either that, I was going to have to send the SWAT team to kidnap Mike. Anyway, there's the whiskey barrel. That's an old. All right, so that's my update. I tried to go fast because I know some of you guys have seen this stuff before.
No, I'm glad it was. Yeah, I thought it was a nice, well-paced presentation, Bernie. As always, really nice, fabulous, meticulous work that you do. It borderlines for me between inspiration and frustration. Well done, man.
Your layout's looking pretty good too, though, I must say.
Yeah, yep. Once we get some look.
You got some awesome scenes.
Thank you.
I need to come back up and reshoot it. I took nice pictures the last time I was there, but one of these days, I did propose a book to Comback and they rejected it. So that's how I ended up with the book I did. But I think it would be kind of cool to do a Civil War books at some point.
Yeah, with all the layouts that are in process. Yeah, down the road.
See how document all this stuff. I mean, we're not getting any younger.
Yep.
It'd be nice to get this. I don't know. That's on my do list, but not for this year.
Right. Well, keep me in mind. Anything I can do to support you in that, you let me know.
Well, you and everyone else that's got layouts, I see LeBron up there. Mike's got to get in there. Who else has got a Civil War? Charlie. We got Mark's got his modules and stuff.
DC will have his moving. Ron Flowers will have his moving.
For a book like this, we need finished scenes. I hate to say it.
Right.
1 or 2 in progress shots are okay, but you really need to wow them with the pictures.
Right. I got it.
So,
Well,
and your layout, I already have some wow pictures from your layout, but I think I can get more.
Oh yeah, it was only half done, I think, when you were here.
Yeah, so.
Cool. Good.
All right.
Any questions or comments for Bernie, guys?
Come to Markham and see the railroad.
Dan?
Just
Love that.
great presentation, great work.
Yeah.
Yeah, nothing but
Agreed.
wow.
What's that, John?
I said nothing but wow.
Did I tell you guys about my flag?
The trapezoid?
No, the flag, this is a real flag back here. You see it in the background? Oh,
Yeah.
maybe yes. Well, if you remember the last time I did one of these Zooms, you guys ridiculed me or gave me a hard time about having a nylon flag.
Oh, right.
And now I have a sewn cotton flag.
Whoa.
So there, and the flags, the stars are cool. They're circular, see?
Wow.
With
Prototypical.
34 stars, the correct number of stars for 1863. They changed over in June when West Virginia came in.
Right.
So I'm right before West Virginia.
I'm going to have to pull a few guys together and we're going to have to watch this tape together and we're going to find a few things that we can point out to you that are prototypically inaccurate.
Well, you can start with the clock. That clock isn't right. Don had a real regulator clock. And I'm thinking, I looked around and there are some of kits that are available. And I thought it'd be kind of cool to have like an old regulator clock in there.
Absolutely.
So that would maybe go where my little engineer castle is. Now, they did have the Corps of Engineers in the Civil War. They did use the castle.
Right. Oh, they did back then.
They did, yeah. But that's a gift from my brother. He got that for me in Korea.
Wow.
So I don't know where else to put it, so I put it over there.
Cool. Good.
One thing I didn't understand, you made me realize I was noticing is a telegraph, if you have one wire, how do you have a complete circuit?
Aha! They used the ground. It was a ground circuit.
Oh,
So you connected, remember, there's no electricity in the Civil War. they were literally making batteries out of glass jars and lead acid solutions and stuff. If you get the telegrapher's manual from back then, one of the things you had to learn was how to make the batteries. So you would make your battery and you put one end in the ground and one end out. Now there are places where there's more than one line. So if you'll notice on my railroad from Aquia to, I think it's Stoneman's, there's 2 lines, and then it goes 1 to Falmouth. And I don't remember why I exactly did it that way, but I did it that way. I must have had a reason. I just don't remember.
Okay.
But the telegraph poles, this won't work for O or HO, but it works for O. They had these things called thimble insulators or top hat insulators. I'm sorry, top hats. And I was originally making them on my lathe out of brass. And then if you guys remember, I used to sell HO freight cars.
Sure.
I had those Tichy Delrin bearing inserts. They were exactly the size and shape of a top hat insulator. And so I laser cut all the little wooden pegs, put the little Tichy Delrin thing on there, and I've got as many, I have thousands of those things because I used to sell the kits.
Right.
So I can make as many insulators, but for O scale, for HO, if you want to do HO layout, they'd be a little big.
Right.
But they might be worth using anyway, just because they have the right shape.
Yep. I was curious, Bernie, when you're working on locomotives, one thing I started doing is based on Al Mueller's methodology. I keep a log of anytime I do anything on locomotives. Do you do anything like that?
Well, I do have my blog. So my
Okay.
blog is my online notebook. So I tell people say, why do you have a blog? Why don't you use Facebook? I say, because my blog is my diary. And I will go back frequently and say, oh, what did I do there? And I'll go back and I can see what I did. And it reminds me, because I'm forgetting stuff now. It's been 13 years on this railroad. So they won the war, and 1/3 the time it's taken me to build this railroad. So, but yeah, so that's what I do. I do have things like this, you know, I have like, this is ideas for the foundry that I was telling you about, Tom.
Right.
There was a foundry in Fredericksburg that looked kind of like this. So
Oh,
I
yeah.
just drew some pictures and I would chop it in half, but I want those letters visible. And it's 2 stories. So probably the bottom is maybe a machine shop and upstairs is probably like carpentry or something.
Mm,
So I don't know.
that's great. Yep. But there's no actual, did you find much information about the workings of that particular mill?
No, not that particular one. I do know that in 1862, when the Union occupied Fredericksburg, that foundry, by the way, was there from the Revolution. They made cannons
Wow.
there in the Revolution. Maybe not that same exact one, but
Right.
Fredericksburg was a manufacturing center. The Union took over the foundry. They ran a spur up to the foundry and they repaired their locomotives there. So it had equipment. But then I also learned that Hop said that Aquia Landing had a full machine shop. And so I don't have a machine shop in Aquia Landing right now. And so that is one of my do list items, is to add that. And I have my engine house and it's in the middle of the Y, and I'm adding a little L to that. And that's where the machine shop is going to be.
Got it.
But that's like bays and, you know, not a crucible and things like that.
Yeah, when you talk about
Cupola, I
that
guess
mill
it's called.
in particular or others, you know, one of the things I've discovered, I believe, is that most manufacturing centers, whether they were mills or foundries, did not have spurs going to them. Is that accurate?
Yes,
Oh,
that's probably
yeah.
true.
So everything had to be loaded on the wagons and then shipped over to a depot or something, right? Because I was thinking,
However, the one in Fredericksburg was unusual in that it did have a spur, which would be, you know, kind of cool. If I put the foundry on my railroad, there's 2 spots I'm looking at, so they would be right next to the tracks anyway.
right.
So
I guess Tredegar was the only other one that might have had a spur.
I have a map of Richmond. I'll check for you.
Okay.
It's in that.
Tom.
It's in the book.
Sorry. Tom, I've been down to Tredegar. and they had an entire system in the complex. They have a small, I think it's Z scale layout there. I have a picture of it somewhere, deep in the camera, but it has all sorts of branches into it. The overall complex, yes.
Got it.
You just have to be careful that that is Civil War era, not post-war.
And it could be confused. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
That's
a lot of-
right.
I have a very detailed map of Richmond. It's in, I'll look for it later, and maybe I'll post it on the group's chat list.
Yep.
I don't remember. Yeah, remember, none of the railroads connected in Richmond back then. They all came in and they ended at their stations. The C&O did run a track from the Hanover line down into the city to transfer some locomotives, and then they pulled it up. They didn't leave it in place. So, they really were against having the trains go through the towns. They wanted you to stay at the hotels and
That's
use
right.
the Teamsters. It's like, I tell people, nothing changes in politics. The lobbyists for the hotels and the Teamsters were just as powerful then as they are now, probably more powerful.
Right.
So
Good.
anyway,
I might be confused. I thought in ironworks or steel something, I've seen where they have these big ovens. They look almost like old brick ovens, but there'd be a bunch of them. What?
oh,
is
those are
that-
coke ovens probably.
Yeah, coke. Yeah, what would that be part of the foundry?
Coke ovens are typically located in this era by the place where the coal was mined, because
Right.
coke is easier to ship than coal.
Right.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
But typically a steel, I wrote a book on steel mills, so you happen to be hitting a spot that I know a little about. Typically, in this era, the mill was situated where one of the prime materials was. So like up in Pennsylvania, they were in the anthracite area because they had anthracite coal, and they would have to bring in the limestone and the iron ore from other places. In Virginia, and even down in Richmond or down in the Fredericksburg area, there was a furnace, Catherine Furnace. If you read about the Battle of Chancellorsville, they fought right by the old furnace there. And they used charcoal from trees to make their coke.
Right. Yep.
In New Jersey during the Revolution and the Civil War, they made a lot of iron because they had what they call bog iron, which was iron ore that was in these swampy areas. And they would, I don't know if they actually got it out of the water, or if they just mined it. But I had a friend who grew up in New Jersey, and he said, if you go swimming in the lakes, your bathing suits come back stained with rust because there's so much iron in the water.
Yeah.
So Tom, that's a little west of you, I think.
Yep. But I know that I was just thinking Cooper Ironworks had a spur that went right to their furnace and foundry. I think LeBron, you're going to continue with that on your layout renovation, aren't you, LeBron?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I remember seeing that. I have a picture of that on your layout, LeBron. The big square furnace.
Yes.
And I
Yeah,
think they mined it was right out of the hills there, right?
Most of it was further north, but it was in that area.
yeah. Shipping things without railroads back then was not easy.
Right.
Or now without boats.
Yep.
So anyway,
All right, guys. Everybody, good to see you. Great turnout. Stay well and build something or read something or
who wants to come to
just enjoy
Marfa?
whatever you're doing.
Where are you located, Bernard?
The middle of the show will be up in the Timonium area or the Baltimore area in October. I live in Alexandria, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And that's in October, you said, right?
It'll be in October. Yeah, I'll put it on Facebook, and we have a website.
Yeah, I want to make sure if we do an annual meet, I want to bypass that weekend.
Yeah. And, if anybody's in the area, come visit me. I'm retired now. I'm home most of the times with COVID. I don't go anywhere practically, other than I am going to be a grandpa in 16 days or so. So I have to go see my granddaughter. But I told my daughter, her mom's going to be there, and her my son-in-law is going to be there. I said, I'm going to come about after a month when things have stabilized. I don't want to be there the first month.
Smart move, Look your age. Yeah, right. Good. All right, gentlemen.
Night.
Good night. Thanks again, Bernie.
Good night.
So much appreciate
Bernie.
the time.
Right,
Good job.
thank you. That was great.
Very nice.
Thank
Chris.
you, guys.
There's a chat.
Good night.
Good night now, guys.
Night.
There we go.